What we've said so far concerning marriage is that we've looked at the development of the inner and the outer life. We're understanding your self life, your flesh life, what makes it up, and what would it mean for you to take up the cross and deny yourself, and what kind of like messages you get that push your buttons. The reason we wanted to do that is that we said marriage always comes to a Y in the road. And if I'm looking for happiness and I'm looking for all of my flesh to be taken away and never get a like message and never be stirred again, that's probably not going to happen. It's not reality. And so people go to the left when they should have went right. They're living for a fantasy. And I just want us to be realistic about going into a relationship. When we come in, we have two bags. We're carrying invisible bags, unique self and the flesh life. And you understand those very well from the previous lectures, so you've got that down. You're going to find tomorrow that when we get into the counseling, all the pieces will just drop together for you. And it's going to be very simple to do because we've already done all the work. All we have to do is take histories tomorrow, and you'll see how all this fits together, and we'll explain those two bags for people. So you have those bags. You start at a point of oneness. You have collisions. You reach a place of emotional divorce, and we believe that we know the other person perfectly well. And now the pathetic thing we do is try to prove all the negatives that we believe about them. We live below the line, and whenever there's an issue, we go into it already believing something about you, a preconceived idea or notion, and I've got to prove that. In the end, I'm going to create in you the very thing that I hate. Now, marriage is unbelievably simple. Husbands love and wives respect. The reason we don't talk about it and we don't hear about it and we avoid it is because we can't do it. The only way we can do it is to say, Jesus, you're welcome here. Now, as we go on then, there's a third man in every marriage. So listen to what I'm saying here, and just because I'm going to ask you in a little bit. And it's funny when you're doing marriage counseling and you say, page 148. 150? It's great the look you get on people's faces when you say, we need to talk about the third person in this marriage. And they're like, what? Yeah, how did he know? Who do you know? What about that? Just the panic look is really great. And I say, yeah, there's a third man, and and the fellow, or there's a third person in your marriage, and the fellow be going, there is? Well, here's what my third person is. The third person is the person that's made up of the husband and the wife, because the two become one flesh. They discovered a few years ago that when you do organ transplants, that you have to have a donor that matches, so you need a brother or sister, but they found out you could do it with husbands and wives now. That if you've lived together, been married for 3 to 5 years, you can actually donate to your mate. And you can use the same anti-rejection drugs, and the organ will work, the transplant will work. And they believe that it's because you're sharing body fluids and you're adjusting and all that. But the thing is, the two become one. Once I read that, I started saying to Betty, I don't have to work out or stay healthy. You just take care of yourself, because you're carrying my organs. Yeah. So I'll say, hey, don't eat that. That's my organ. And so she's got to stay healthy, but I don't, because I can get all the organs I need. Well, in the same way, we are one. We've become one. And just as there's an inner and an outer life, there is an inner and an outer marriage. And so we use a little diagram to explain that. And I'll say to people, in box A, what does your outer marriage look like? How do you describe it? How would other people describe it? Have you ever known a couple to get a divorce and it was a shock to you that they got a divorce? You weren't expecting it at all? Because of their outer marriage, because they were happy and it was fun and there was unity and they were enjoyable and all those kind of things. So they have a great outer marriage, these two people that have become one. But what describes the inner marriage? Well, often people will tell me this: there's no communication, it's a prison, we can't meet each other's needs, we're unhappy, it's hopeless, and there's no affection. And then I ask the same questions. How did you develop into this kind of an intermarriage? And so I'll ask the husband, tell me things you did, 3 things that you won't argue about, that you know you did. Well, I worked a lot. I was always angry, and I was drunk. Well, do you believe that that might make the marriage look like some of these things? I'll ask the wife, tell me 3 things that you did. Well, I withdrew, I refused to talk, and I told my mother everything he did wrong. Does that affect the intermarriage a little bit? And then I'll always ask them, from your 2 bags of flesh and personality, when you were looking at your mate, trying to know them, did you ever accuse your husband of 3 things that he didn't do? Because we've all been accused of things we just absolutely didn't do. And those false accusations affect the intermarriage too. And in the same way, did you ever accuse her of things that she just absolutely didn't do? I'm not going to confess to it, I didn't do it. So it's another way to look at the bags. Do you see all this material ties together? Yeah. It's all ties together in the end. If you go through it enough, you'll see how it starts to tie together. Everything ties together and you're building on it. And so I'm saying you brought in those 2 bags, and now I'm saying it a different way. How did that affect the development of my intermarriage? Before I just looked at the emotional divorce it created. Now I'm asking, how did it affect the development of our intermarriage? And so with my 2 bags, with my flesh and with my personality, I did things in the flesh and I got falsely accused for things. You did things and you got falsely accused. The marriage developed into this. Now, what things have you done up to today to fix this marriage? Well, has counseling helped? Pointing out the faults of others, blaming, trying harder, understanding all the books you've read, time together, talking to friends. Does any of that bring any change? Now, here's what happens. When you can't change, what do? Well, we've tried to change the marriage, and we can't. So the next thing I do is give up. And so when I give up, I'm going to withdraw. I'm going to stop trying. I'll look to others. I'm going to stay at work, put my life into that, put my life into kids, find some kind of hobby, just stay away, try to find acceptance from others, and then the fantasy of if only I'd done something different. At that point, just like our idols prove our identity, doing these things proves that the marriage is hopeless. And we end up in the same spiral. Now, when we looked at the inner and the outer man, and we said, all right, here's your inner and outer man, and we've already discussed that in the marriage conference up to this point. You looked to others, you developed an image, you tried to change or cover up, and you fell into your idols. And what was the solution to all this? Because the tree of good and evil is not going to change it. What's the solution?
Exchange life.
Exchange life. Get Christ as my life. So what would be the solution for this couple? Yeah, get a life. Get a marriage. Because not only am I talking to both of you about getting a life, if you'll both get a life, then the new marriage needs a new life. You can't keep propping up the same old dead horse and think it's going to go. My goal in a marriage conference is not to guilt manipulate people back together, not to reason people back together, not to make them feel, not to have willpower to go back together, because if the root issues aren't fixed, they're going to be sitting in front of you in another 3 years. And another 6 years and another 10 years. They're still going to be there if the root issue isn't dealt with. And I'll look at them sometimes and I'll say, both of you need to get a different mate. And they go, yeah? Well, no, that's not what I mean. If you got a new life, you would become a new creation. If the two of you together make up your marriage, what could you have? You could have a brand new marriage, and that's what I want you to have, a new marriage. Now, when Christ, there's baggage from the old life here, and when my focus is on Christ, He flows through me, He locks the bags, and I experience His peace, His love. If I let Christ come in here with 2 new people, is there still baggage from the old marriage? Yeah. And together as a couple, when he's my focus, none of that bothers me. But when he's not my focus, and like messages come, the door closes, and all this stuff stirs up again, and we sit over here when all this stirs up again, that's not the problem. What's the problem? I've closed the door. It's God's stronghold in me to keep me near. If I don't want to experience all this in my marriage, then draw back to Him. Go to the root. You see how these two diagrams apply to each other? There's a lot that you could do with those two diagrams. And it's really simple at this point. This was, and you tell me, was this understandable? This diagram of husband and wife? Have you ever looked at it that way before? But after we've looked at this diagram of the inner and the outer man, and we've worked that, and we've come to this place, people are understanding more quickly, more readily, and they're getting it, and they're seeing it. That of course my inner marriage looks like this. What do I expect coming into it with this stuff? It's going to do that. So I have an outer and an inner marriage. The outer marriage looks like this. That's what people see. But in the inner marriage, I really feel like this because of my two bags that I brought in. We've tried a lot to change it. We can't change it. We can't cover it up anymore, so we're coping like this. And coping like this just proves that it's hopeless. And it spirals down. What I need is a new marriage, a new wife, a new husband. We've had Christ as our life over here. You become a new creation. If you're a new creation and you're both knit together as one, then you could have a new marriage because you'd have new people in here. Not only do I expect you to take up the cross and deny your flesh here as we've defined it, I expect you to take up the cross and deny these feelings of your marriage and begin to move forward. Okay, write me a sentence about what you heard with that. Okay, Ken.
Just like we have taken a new life in Christ individually, we need to take a new life in the marriage. We recognize Christ by faith through humility to open the door to
that. Yep. Just read around it. Outer marriage, inner marriage. How did I get it? My two bags I brought in. I brought in those two bags, and so we've developed into this inner marriage, and we've attempted to change it, and we can't, and now we've decided it's hopeless, and we're in our little spiral. Yeah. And the solution for that was to get a new life for me. If we could both get a new life, this marriage could really change. In fact, it would be changed. It would be a completely new marriage. And what we did in the past, we wouldn't have done now. We can move forward. Here's my transitional statement. Here's where I was going with this. You guys are right with me. This is the transitional statement. Okay, but my husband doesn't want to do that. And that's the transitional statement. But my husband doesn't want to do that. So now what? So, we go to our next diagram. Here was Adam, and God created Adam in His image. And the Bible says that He created Adam, and it's singular. He was a man. Adam was singular. Adam was a male and a female in the same body. And God couldn't find anyone for him to fellowship with, so He did something. He took out of Adam the female. And then it says twice in Genesis that God created man, and both times it's singular. When it said that God created man, Adam, it's singular, and that man was a male and female in one body. And then it says again that He created man, it's still singular, and a male and a female. And so the two actually become one. Now here's our concept of oneness, and it's a distorted concept. We see oneness like this. That here's the husband, and he has all these needs, and he's an individual. And if he gets all his needs met, he might have something to give to his wife. And then she's an individual, and she has needs, and we never want to take away our individuality. We never want to lose that. And when I get my needs met, I'll be able to give you something back. So what it really is two individuals living together, trying to be one, and they're really separate. Now, marriage is the death of your individuality. And so what happens at marriage is the day you're married, it's like putting flour and milk in a bowl, and you turn on the mixer and you begin to mix it together, can you undo that mixture? No, it can't be done. Now, somebody's going to ask you this question. Do you believe in this? Oneness? I mean, you're blended together and you're one? Okay, well, what happens when my husband dies or he left me or we had a divorce? Now what? Well, what God has put together, no man separates. It doesn't say God can't separate it. And do you see that people get remarried in scriptures when they're given that if an unbeliever doesn't want to stay with you, you're not bound? And he doesn't say you can't ever get married again. I don't believe that we can undo this, but I believe by choice God will honor our choice and undo it. Now, that is not my point in the marriage conference. Okay? I'm answering that question for you, and I'm not looking out there for people who want excuses for whatever they want to do or anything else. But I'm saying that I believe God can separate that, and He does, because people get remarried. And but that's not our point here, is it? That you put the flour and milk in a bowl, and you blend those two things together. Now, if you throw in food coloring, and the mixer's still running, what happens to the whole bowl? Yeah, it'll take this on. Now, if I throw dirt at Betty, who am I throwing dirt at?
You.
There you. Well, you got that message. So if I throw dirt at her, who's getting dirty?
You.
You. I am. I'm the one that's getting dirty. If I love her, who gets loved?
You.
If you love your wife, who you loving?
You.
Yeah. If you respect your husband, who you respecting?
Yourself.
Yeah. And that's why it's always, that's why you're happier if you're loving and respecting, because it comes back on you. Now, you're the only one who has Christ as your life. But you're going to every day say, Jesus, come and be my respect, come and be my love, come and be my words, come and be to me everything I'm not. And He's not going to do that. You're inviting that into your life. Whose life are you inviting it into? Into His life. Now we understand what Paul means. The unbelieving mate can be sanctified by the believing mate, and the children made holy. Because I've invited him into your life. And here's what happens. A woman is faithful for 30 years to do this. Now, there's a blessing being married to an unbeliever or a carnal Christian. And what we're told is it's a curse, and that's not true. And we go back to this passage, well, you're not supposed to marry an unbeliever. I know that. I know all about that. People have done it, though. Now what? You thought you were marrying a believer, and you found out you're not. Now what? You really thought you'd married a believer, and you find out he's completely carnal and doesn't care. Now what? Now what? What do you do? Is that just a curse, and now I'm a second-class Christian, and my life's going to be miserable? Do you know God so loved the world when it didn't love Him? And if you decide to love someone and give your life to them when they don't love Him, and you do that for 30 years, the power of God is behind you to do that. Because you love those that don't love Him. And I'm going to love you. It's not my love. It's His love through me. You may think it's me, but it's not me. It's Him living through me. I'm doing it. I'm going to invite it in. And at the end of the 30 years, the heart's revealed. But again, He's put you on the vine in the best place to give you the best opportunity to recognize Him, to see Him. Some people may never respond to it. But I'll tell you what, when someone does, it's amazing what happens. And so a lady's done this for 30 years, and her husband goes to Promise Keepers with the neighbor. And he goes to Promise Keepers meeting, and he has this incredible revelation, conversion. He gives his life to Christ. And everyone says, my, that Promise Keeper speaker is good. And so he comes to the Abiding Life Conference, and he listens to Mike, and he gives his life to Christ, and he sees Christ as his life. My, that's a great conference. Do you know what? It wasn't Mike. It was 30 years of her being faithfully inviting Christ into her life, inviting Him into the whole family, and then one day another witness came. All we are is a witness to the work of God. Because if the Bible had the power in it, people said if you read to 100, 100 to be moved. 2 or 3 are moved. Why are they moved? Because God's working at that point in their life, and you witness to it. And the Scriptures witness to that. And I can witness to that. And all of nature witnesses to that. And now there's a huge thing that happens. And here's another thing that's exciting. As you invite that into your family, and you're the only one in the family doing that, it's the only foundation that you've laid for your kids. And here's something we saw a long time ago. That when you fall as an adult, you will always fall to the only foundation you have. I've seen people who are raised in drugs and alcohol, they become Christians. When they fall, they're right back down into drugs and alcohol. Because it's their foundation. If you laid a foundation of Christ, where's anybody going to fall?
Back in his arms.
That's the only way, the only place you do have to fall. All you got to do is wait. And they'll fall back in there. So if you're the first one to hear the call, if you're the first one to hear the message, if it makes sense to you first, please do it. You invite him in. And you keep inviting him in. And just let this continue to work and work and work. As you're taking up the cross, denying yourself, you'll see this begin to create a contrast as you're blended together. Oneness in the Bible means to blend. It's used of the church and the body of Christ. The proof of oneness is the ability to make someone else miserable. There's other people in the church can make me miserable because we're one. It's used about Christ and the Father being one, and it's also used about my spirit and his spirit and how we're blended together and we've become one. Now, in this oneness, I want to make one more point. You can now, in this diagram, just say, you can start out that God created Adam and Eve, that's all you need to say. And he said that they would become one. Oneness is putting flour and milk in a bowl, and you just explain that. Now, whatever you do, if you put in food coloring, it changes. If you've heard the message, if you believe it, and you start abiding, and you start recognizing him and inviting his life in, it's going to have an incredible impact. Now, we've looked at oneness in two areas. The first is the inner and outer marriage, that new man. The second thing we've looked at is how we're blended together and how we affect each other. The third thing I want to look at, and it's worth bringing up nearly anywhere in the world, I think it's worth bringing up, and that is, what does an affair do to a marriage? Is that a good question? And here's the thing, I did this with the Amish. They weren't that excited about the topic. And I said, well, it happens, and you're going to get your information somewhere, so you might as well get it from a good source. You might as well get the information about affairs in the church other than anywhere else. Now, here's one of the things that I have to have personally, and you can tell me if you disagree, if you don't like it or not. There's a lot of ways you can have unity with a person. You can have unity in thought. You can have unity in action. You could even have sexual unity, but the only place that God makes you one is the blending together in your spirit. Now, does an affair break that? Does an affair destroy oneness? If it does, what do you do at that point? How do you rebuild? Well, let me ask this question. Does rape ruin oneness? Now, in some cultures it does. If you're raped, your oneness is gone, and now you get rid of the woman, you throw her out on the street so she gets a double beating. Does it break oneness? Paul is addressing those in Corinth that are going to the temple prostitutes. Male and females alike are going to the temple prostitutes. He says stop doing it. He doesn't say your marriage is over. Nothing can affect my oneness. Now, why am I making that point? Well, if that's not true, what do I have to build on after an affair? I've got to have something to build on. And I build on this point when both people are sitting there, is that, look, you're still one. Now, in a few months, your flesh will have flaked off and none of this would have happened. And if your husband's touching you, in 3 months from now, he's the first one who ever touched you. You've never done this before. You are one. So it doesn't wreck your oneness. I have a beginning point. Here's my point. I'm not letting people out of the marriage because of an affair. I at first want to try to work through it and see if we can salvage anything. Now, some people don't want anything salvaged. They're just going to go on, and they've already predetermined what they're going to do. But can we salvage it? I want to salvage the thing. This is my beginning point of oneness. So number one, I believe it can be salvaged, and I believe there's a point of oneness. What do you guys think of that? You agree? So I'm going to salvage it. Now, here's the next problem in marriage counseling when it comes to an affair. The husband realizes what he's been doing, comes under conviction, feels terrible. He's had 18 months of living in this hell, sneaking around, knowing he's destroying his family, being miserable, God's thumb on him, and he goes to his wife and he said, I've done this. Now will you forgive me? It's the first she's heard of it. Do you think she's taken back a little? He's had 18 months to come to this point of making a confession, and in an instant he wants forgiveness. Well, she has to give forgiveness. There's no forgiveness for unforgiveness. So she says, I forgive you. So we're right on track up to now. He's failed. He's been under pressure. He's confessed. It's been his own choice. He wants to stay in it. He wants to move forward. We're right on track. He's asked for forgiveness, and she's given it. Now, here's where the thing goes south. If she ever asks a question again, she's not walking in forgiveness. Do you see how that wrecks you? Because your whole security has been knocked out from under you. I didn't know this was going on. I didn't know this was happening. I just thought you were going to work. I thought you were actually late when you came home every night and you told me you were late. Now, how will I believe you again? How will I know what's going on? And I think we have to give people a little time to work through this. And so that's why we call it the affair stew. There's a stew here, and forgiveness has to be given and it has to be asked for. But now there's issues, if this woman has been offended, that I really want to take a little bit of time and go through. These are the things I found the enemy would whisper to a woman whose husband had an affair. And I want to talk to her about these things and let her work through them and go through the pain of it and get some healing in the thing from him. I've wasted my life. I'm embarrassed. It's a huge embarrassment. I've been used. All of my emotions. I'm trapped. Where would I go if I wanted to? I'm the one taking care of the kids. There's anger, the feeling of being a victim in it, and then the whole issue of what I do about the children. Do you see that? If the woman had the affair, I've got these issues that I'm probably going to have to work with the man. The issue of forgiveness, because he's going to want justice. Can I kill the guy? And at what point do I have closure? Because men view sex different than women do. And one of the things that will happen to this man is every time they're involved in intimacy, the enemy's going to whisper to you, you know, she was with someone else. You think she enjoyed him more than you? What was that really like? So you got all that to go through. Intimacy's affected sex. There's all the emotions, jealousy. And then there's this thing of faith versus trust. I'll never be able to trust you again. When will I be able to trust you again? And that's a terrible place to get stuck, because you put yourself as a victim on the throne and you start saying to the other person, perform, perform, perform until my lying emotions or my legitimate emotions that I can't trust you change. You with me? Now, as we said, if you have lying emotions and the lying emotions say, I can't trust you, but the fact is you've had a conversion and I can trust, how long am I going to have to wait? How do I change lying emotions into fact? Faith. I'll never be able to get these emotions sorted out. And so I tell people, you should have never been trusting your mate anyway. You should have had faith in them. Because eventually what happens, if you set yourself up on the throne and say, keep performing, and one day I'll let you know when I can trust you again, the other person finally gets burnt out and says, I don't even care anymore. This is impossible to ever earn trust. So we're saying, no, I don't want you to have trust. I want you to have faith. This is going to be a process that takes some time. So your emotions are way down here at the bottom, and we're not going to try to get them up here right away. It's interesting, as soon as people have an affair and it's all brought out, their sex life goes through the roof. And they'll always say, you know, we're having the best sex we've ever had. And I go, yeah, well, that's all ending. Because what you're trying to do, is reestablish oneness instead of recognizing oneness. And you're trying to go clear up here with it. And the thing is, you're going to come back down here again pretty soon. God just wants to take you this way. I want to walk with you through what's the normal things to expect in an affair. So, do you think when the people came to the church service, they ever thought they were going to get all this? This is what we were going to talk about, real life, what really happens. But that's what they're getting. This is real life. You brought in 2 bags. You started at oneness, spread apart. You got emotionally divorced. Now you developed a concept. You got a vested interest to prove it. You live below the line. You create in your mate the very thing that you hate, when really all you need to do is love and respect, but you can't do it on your own. He's got to do it for you. Then just as you have an inner life and an outer life, there's an outer marriage and inner marriage. What did you do to develop it into the mess it is? The real solution would be get a new life. And if you got a new life, you could get a new marriage. But what if you got a mate that doesn't want the new marriage? Well, God created Adam, a male and female. He took the female out. They were both one. And now, marriage is not 2 individuals living together, but 2 individuals blended together. What you invite into your life is invited into the other. So keep inviting Christ in and put on the pressure. You are one. When there's an affair, build on your oneness. The oneness is there. You need to forgive. You need to confess. But now we've got issues that we ought to work through. There's a wide path that leads to death and a narrow path that leads to life. If I wanted to take people out of the wide path, I'd put them in the narrow one. And God has a funnel to put you in the narrow path, and it's called problems. The world, activity, it's in the back there. Enemy. One what?
160.
Okay. 160. All of these problems are bringing you into His presence. There's nothing His nearness doesn't fix.